When I was about 15 years old, I had my first girlfriend. And at the time, she was the first girl that had ever shown serious interest in me. I also thought maybe she'll be the only girl that will ever show interest in me. And so I did everything in my power that I could to go ahead and keep her. I didn't have much money, but I would save up all my money, buy her roses, take her on dates, do everything I could. And she would tell me, my goodness, Sungjoo, you're like the best thing that's ever happened to me. And then I introduced her to my friend Michael. Michael was very good looking. I was a competitive mathematician. Michael was an athlete. He was strong. He was about a foot taller than me. He had everything going for him. And I think you can tell where the story's going because about 2 weeks later, I got left behind in the dust and out with the old, in with the new. That is a lesson that I've never taken for granted to this day, especially as it relates to consumer technology. I want to begin this talk by discussing something that I call the 15-year flywheel, which is a really interesting pattern that has occurred over the past 60 years. Every 15 or so years, there have been tectonic shifts in consumer tech form factor. Prior to 1969, in order to interact with a computer, you had to fill out a punch card. You had to poke the little holes in it, you'd put it in there, and it would do the calculations for you. And then we saw in 1969 the creation of the Thomson shell, the first Unix shell that you could just prompt. If you knew the terminals, and it gave rise to the modern terminal commands, you could type in stuff and it would do way more calculations for you. This was the base case of out with the old, in with the new, that you could reveal way more preferences and inform the computer of exactly what you wanted it to do at a much higher frequency, and it would do way more things for you. About 14 years later, we see the rise of the graphical user interface. And the graphical user interface was released when the Apple Macintosh came out in 1983. So we went from these terminal commands where you had to be really good and know everything to prompt the terminal to these beautiful abstraction layers where there were icons and they were very intuitive. You would just click on them and they would do stuff for you. Again, out with the old, in with the new, because now it was almost democratic in a sense. There wasn't a high skill barrier. If you could afford it, then you could have a personal computer in your home that most people could intuitively navigate, and you could inform the computer what you wanted to do, and you would get really cool outcomes on the other end. About 12 years later, again, out with the old, in with the new. We see the rise of the web native interface, and we go from individual operating systems and these big clunky computers to the rise of browsers like Mosaic and Netscape and Internet Explorer. And these browsers allowed you to connect with other people. You could inform the computer what you wanted it to do, and it would go ahead and connect you with a bunch of other people who also had other things that they wanted to do. You could do things like e-commerce and buy books online from people's bookstores. You could go ahead and talk to people, find message boards and leave messages about people that shared common interests with you. Again, out with the old, in with the new, and form factor changed. 14 years later, we saw the rise of the mobile native interface. Now, desktop computers are cool. People still use them today, and it's not always a binary one or the other. But we saw the rise of the iPhone and tablets and other smartphones. And for the first time in human history, it became almost ubiquitous. You had these things that could fit in your pocket, and you had the power of desktop computing on you at all times. Out with the old, in with the new, more people could reveal their preferences to the computer and match with each other and do all these really cool things at all times. It's always with you. 16 years later, where does that leave us? It begs the question, what is going to happen in 2025? Well, I think a good place to start is by examining the one first underlying principle to all of these massive tectonic shifts. And it's something that I call the preference principle. So what is the preference principle? All it states is that the higher the number of revealed preferences, revealed personal preferences, the better the collective outcomes. That's a pretty jargony, buzzwordy statement, but in its simplest form, it just means if you have a group of people and you can extract more information about what they want and what they know, then you are likely to have better outcomes on average for the median member of that group. And this is for two reasons. The first is that there's more net information that exists. A lot of poor group decision-making is actually just the result of having poor information quality or incomplete information sets. If you have more people that are volunteering their decentralized information, you're more likely to make better informed decisions as a group. But the second is that there's some corrective wisdom of the crowd. That is to say that if I am about to make a bad decision, if I have a constellation of a million different reference points of what other people know, then I can say and see, oh, maybe I shouldn't make this decision because there are so many other people that show me what the median actually should be. About 2 years ago, I spent time as a member of the research staff at Caltech in a behavioral economics lab. And this is actually an underlying principle that exists all across the world. When you look at welfare distribution is just a product of what people need, finding out what they need, and trying to distribute and allocate resources in an efficient manner. In order to do this effectively, you need to have honest information about what those needs actually are. You look at auctions and auction theory, it's the same thing. Auctions are most efficient when individuals have a reference point of what other people in the auction are doing as well, because on the buy side, I don't want to overbid, so I want to see what other people are thinking. On the seller side, you don't want people to fear overbidding and not participate in the auction in the first place. You look at hiring decisions. If we want to have efficient labor allocation all across the world, what we need is a lot of information on what people's skills actually are, such that for a job that requires really high amount of skills, we don't assign someone who doesn't have those skills, and vice versa. And even trial by jury. We have juries of multiple people, not because we want to take up people's times. Nobody likes jury duty. It's because if I were the individual judge, jury, and executioner, hence the term, then we would have really inaccurate decision-making. The accuracy rate would literally be 1 minus whatever my personal error rate is. And so there's some wisdom of the crowd and more information that comes in with diverse viewpoints. This is something that is incredibly understudied, but crucial in consumer technology. What do I mean by understudied? Well, think about the way that people talk about consumer tech form factor. It's very strange because it's not just about the hardware dimensions, right? This is a definition that a lot of people like to use. What are the hardware dimensions of any given product? What I would say is my iPhone 7, the first iPhone that I ever had, was actually half the weight of the iPhone 14 that I use today. So it's not actually strictly about the dimensions itself, or else we'd see a more consistent pattern over time. It's also not just the end experiences that those dimensions create. A lot of UI UX designers and design teams in startups across the country like to think of this almost as a function of how beautiful does it look. That matters. There's no arguing that it doesn't, but there were a lot of beautiful interfaces that came out in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s in consumer tech that I could argue are more beautiful than the minimalist interfaces we have today, and other people could argue the other way around. So it's strictly not a function of the end experiences. Actually, what you see is that all of these improvements are most highly correlated with how much participation and preference revealing that any given form factor can solicit from an individual. This is because participation just means you have more aggregated preferences among a wide group of people, and more aggregated preferences means higher information quality and therefore product quality. If you think about all the best products of this era, all the best software items, the things that we use on a day-to-day basis, Google just gives you way more information and it increases with scale. LinkedIn does the same because it allows you to figure out more information on whatever group that you're competing against to get a job, or from the hiring perspective, what other candidates might actually have. YouTube gives us visual information on actually how to do things in our lives, and it's another example of this preference principle, and it leads to higher product quality. What have we seen in 2025? We've seen massive improvements in natural language processing. I'm sure everyone in this room has seen this. There is a huge arbitrage opportunity to increase the solicitation of these revealed personal preferences. Because with unnatural language, there's no trust that is built between the user and the interface. That is to say, if a website was like, give me everything about your personal life, give me who you're romantically interested in, give me all the things you think about your boss, give me all this wide variety of personal information, you're probably not as likely to volunteer that. But with natural language is an inherent degree of trust. This is a function of evolutionary biology. If someone speaks your language, you are more likely to trust them, and they are more likely to trust you. And there's a really great arbitrage of trust that can be built off of that. So in 2025, my prediction for the next 15 years is that the interfaces are going to be defined as living, breathing assistant interfaces. These are interfaces where the computers can proactively facilitate the revealing of these preferences through all the methods that a human being would, at times being indistinguishable, whether it's calling, texting, emailing, or even coming to life in the hardware form factor much more towards the end of that 15-year period. I think there's a really interesting equation that will make consumer products very successful, and it comes in 3 parts. The first is you set up some agent or process that can proactively solicit personal preferences in natural language to capitalize on this arbitrage of trust. Then you get as many people as you can to reveal their personal preferences in whatever context that might be. Hiring, romantic matchmaking, you just moved to a new city and you want to meet friends, whatever that might look like. that is what you do. And you can drive really great collective outcomes on the other end because you can create a data escrow of individual preferences and create stable matches within that escrow to drive really amazing outcomes. The great consumer tech products of the next 15 years, simply put, are going to be living, breathing agents that talk like a human and solicit these preferences, and just, you won't even be able to tell, I think, is what the future is going to be defined by, until they sound, feel, and even look like you. Thank you.
All right.